I'm jogging for Jesus. Jogging for Jesus. We're all jogging for Jesus. Jogging for Jesus. Whew. What a wonderful and glorious day it is. I am Joel Godsend. I am the pastor of Coweta Baptist Church in Coweta, North Carolina. How's everybody today? Amen. God spoke to me last night and He said very clearly, I need $1,000 from each of you, and I need 48 hours of your volunteer time. We are putting a new wing on the sanctuary of our church. And therefore, if you don't do that, unfortunately, you are not doing what God has asked you to do. We're going to come back to Pastor Joel in a few moments. A kindergarten school teacher went to her classroom, and she said, I would like each of you to state your name, state your faith, and present something of importance to your religion that the class can see and show and tell. So the first little boy stood up and he said, Hi, my name is Benjamin. I am Jewish, and this is a Star of David. Ooh, ah, said the class. Little girl stood up and she said, Hi, my name is Mary, and I am a Catholic, and this is a rosary. Ooh, ah, said the class. Little boy named Tommy stood up and he said, Hi, my name is Tommy, and this is a casserole. Methodist. There you go. Mother walked into her son's room one morning and she said, Son, get your butt out of bed and go to church. And he said, I don't want to go to church. And she said, Son, I told you to get your butt out of bed and go to church. He said, Mom, I'm going to give you 2 good reasons why I don't want to go to church. I don't like them, and they don't like me. And she said, Son, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why you need to go to church. You are a 49-year-old man, and you're the minister. Now, we laugh at those because part of it is a stereotype of Methodism that, yes, we love to eat, and we're going to be doing it again today, but the other reason is we laugh because it is kind of funny to think we're thinking of a child in that joke, but, there's a minister who kind of doesn't want to do what he's supposed to do. How many of you have had an impure thought? Shame, 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 sinner, sinner, sinner. All of us. We, of the Christian faith, know of the 7 deadly sins. Remember the 7 deadly sins? Envy, gluttony, greed, lust, pride, sloth, wrath. Okay? Envy is a jealousy that moves us far away from Christ. Gluttony. Gluttony is the overconsumption of food for our bodies that is not necessary to maintain what we do. The overconsumption of drink for our bodies that is more than what we should be doing. It is also gluttony, the overconsumption of wealth in spite of what you are doing as a Christian. That in spite of what is necessary as a Christian. Greed is the taking from others at their expense for you. Okay, pretty simplistic. Lust, of course, is physical attraction to someone that is not of your relationship domain. Pride. Placing yourself above others on the plane of earth, and therefore placing yourself above God. When you do this, sometimes God has a funny way of knocking the nose back down. Okay? Sloth. Sloth is an interesting one. Sloth is a laziness. It is an apathy. But it is an apathy of the body. This sort of thing. The bottom line is, and I'm guilty of it myself, the only thing we have of importance, and a lot of people don't kind of realize that, and I guess the older we get, the more we do, there's only one thing of real importance that you have in this lifetime, that you possess, and that is your physical body. And if you don't take care of it, time and or God and or disease or what have you takes all of this perception that we have that's from in here outward, and our whole universe turns inward. So really, and all of us understand, especially when we get sick, when we get ill, we get a little scared, take care of the body. Well, sloth is not taking care of the physical body. We have been given it as a gift to get us through life, locomote us, express, do everything we do, and then we don't take care of it. That's the one real thing we have to take care of, because everything else comes off of that. All of our relationships, caring for our children, caring for our families, caring for our friends, and everything we do for God. Sloth is also an apathy of relationships, believing that everything is about the self and not really about the interaction with people. Sloth is also a spiritual apathy. I don't feel like going to church today because I just don't want to do it. Well, that's sloth. We are supposed to come to church, or not necessarily church. I've never necessarily believed you have to do that, to worship God. But have you not worshipped? That's the bottom line. Sloth is not doing that. Wrath is an anger to end all angers. It is an anger that moves you far away from God. Okay? I believe, actually, as the sermon states today, there is an 8th deadly sin. And it is a sin composed of pure selfishness. That sin is hypocrisy. And I believe it should be one of the 8, as opposed to just, the 7. Spiritual hypocrisy specifically can be extremely deadly. Jesus always in the Bible hit hypocrisy very hard. In Luke 12, Jesus said, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees," which is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy can sometimes start very small, but if not checked, it fools the perpetrator who's performing the hypocrisy into believing that everything is still all right with God. My relationship with God is great, even though I'm over here doing this. That's not true. Hypocrisy in such a communal organization as this, like a church, can spread like a malicious virus if it is not stopped when it happens. Matthew 6 and 7, as Jay read, covered almsgiving and judging others. Don't trumpet your almsgiving. Here's what I gave, here's what I do. No, God knows what you're doing and what you can give and all of that. But for you to trumpet it to others is a form of hypocrisy. Why do you have to declare that? You're not here to impress others. You're here for the Lord. That's the bottom line. Judging. Judge not lest ye be judged. We've all heard that. It's very important. That's part of hypocrisy too. Who am I to point the finger at anybody and say, I'm better than any of you, when God doesn't care, and in fact, that's not true. There are many ways that you folks can do things better than I can, and all of this, and it all evens out in the eyes of the Lord. Acts 5 brings us the story of Ananias and Sapphira, husband and wife, who were very good in real estate, and they sold a whole bunch of property. They took this property to the apostles' feet. The proceeds of the sale is what they did. They claimed that they had brought all of the proceeds of the sale to the church. We sold X amount. Here you go, apostles. Here's all of it. Okay? The issue was that it was only a claim, because they had kept part of that for themselves. Peter exposed the lie. All right? The sin was actually not the partial embezzlement that they did. The sin was an hypocrisy in that they attempted to make others believe that they were more spiritual than they were with this big donation. That's where the sloth hypocrisy occurred. Within 3 hours, God destroyed them both. And it was a literal pot from heaven. Got Ananias first. 3 hours later, when the wife was exposed, and they said, you knew of this, you were part of this, God took her too. It was an instantaneous decision from heaven. And I dare say, if God was doing that kind of thing, today, there would be a lot of churches that would possibly be morgues, because that's a pretty quick judgment. There are hypocrisies of impedance, I would say, presenting progress as an adversity to change. One example that we hear a lot, and we either hear it at work and sometimes we hear it in churches, why do we do X, Y, and Z? Because we've always done it that way. How many times have we said that? That's fine, except that doesn't necessarily make it right. We should never be opposed to the change that we are trying to make. We should examine it, see if it improves things, and then let's move forward with it. Sometimes I look at that sort of aversity to change as a cognitive dissonance. We know it's wrong, but we do it anyway. We know that in San Francisco, the city is sitting on a major fault line, has little quakes all the time. What do? Let's go build more homes on it. Not me. No, no, no. You know, I'm not willing to take the gamble. That's a cognitive dissonance. Another one is the internet, for example. We've all heard of all these businesses that the data's been stolen. Hacker, hacker, hacker. It's now become part of our lexicon. Everybody's stealing the data. The internet is corrupt. There's all kinds of things that can damage your business, your computers. But what's the latest thing? Let's internet connect our homes. Let's all put the heat on, and the alarm systems, and the doors, and look what I can do on my little phone app. And I can unlock my doors in my home, and I can turn the heat up, and I can turn the music on. Well, guess what? So will the hackers. You're about to hear of a whole new kind of crime where the hackers are coming into people's homes and turning off their alarm systems and going in because if they can find a way to override and make money on a weakness, then that's exactly what they're going to do. Cognitive dissonance. Don't believe all the fluff that it's going to be big and wonderful when that quite hasn't been proven yet. Someone's going to find a way to abuse it. Children, as we had a little discussion here earlier, I believe, have an antenna not only to paradox, they have an antenna to hypocrisy. Nothing can turn a child away from a church quicker than parents who say, in front of their children and to others in a church, for example, blah, 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 here's how we do it, blah, 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 and then they go home, and it's an entirely different story, entirely different process. That will turn children off immediately. Children see through adult hypocrisies. Children see through those paradoxes. So sometimes you might wonder, why is my child acting that way? Well, because they just saw you say this, but do this. And sometimes we really have to watch that because they're always little sponges absorbing everything that they see. And they know when, don't do as I do as I say. You just do as I say. That's what we do. But then we don't teach them, for example, not to lie, not to create a paradox. We do it ourselves. Sometimes we have to think on that. I have seen the Bible used as both a weapon and a shield. And I have never believed that book is for that purpose. The book is a learning tool. It is a lesson tool. And I witnessed it used as both in one incident many years ago. Years ago, when I was raised in South Carolina as a Southern Baptist. And I can tell you that every Sunday was, in that particular church, hellfire and brimstone. We never walked out of that church feeling good. You never did. You knew you were a sinner, you felt it, and you had better correct yourself in that next week. It was not pleasant to come to church, but it was required because in those days, you got the upside the head if you gave your mother or father back talk. You went to church and everybody went and all the children were scared to death and some of the adults too. But it was not a pleasant experience. Now back to Pastor Joel Godsend. I went, when I was on military leave, down to visit family, and with a couple of members of my distant family, I went to their Southern Baptist church, and I had not been in a long time. And we sat in the congregation. They sat up front. I decided to sit in the back because, I wanted to see what's going on. And I was already having leanings more toward Methodism than Southern Baptist. I kind of didn't want to get back into just sort of the weight, the gravity of that particular thing. And sometimes, as Deb will tell you, I don't see the forest for the trees. Something can be right in front of me, and I kind of don't see it because I'm looking at something else or another way, or this sort of thing. And Pastor Joel got up there, And at the end of the service, he proceeded to say that God had spoken to him. He needed $1,000 from every parishioner in 48 hours of their time because they're putting a new wing on the church. And, you know, the church was packed with people. And I'm sitting in the back. And not seeing the forest for the trees, I didn't even notice who was sitting next to me with a little personal space between us. And it was a very young woman, dressed as best as she could be in Sunday fare. It looked like something that had been taken hand-me-down. Sitting in her lap was a baby, very, very small infant, sound asleep in her lap. Sitting to her right was what looked like a very dozy, maybe 1.5, 2-year-old. And then there was a 3-year-old on her other side. So this little grouping of, 4 souls were all just sitting huddled together. And what made me notice her was after Pastor Joel said he needed $1,000 in 48 hours of her time, I heard a sob. And I looked to my right, and she had buried her head in that baby. And I heard her say, "What am I going to do? I don't have it. I'm going to hell." And I watched her soul break. And that filled me with such a rage. And it makes me angry every time I remember it. And I hate having to remember it. But I looked over at her and she believed that. And she said, "I'm going to hell. There's nothing. I don't have it. What am I going to do?" There was no ring on her finger. There was no man by her side. And I watched her soul break. And I felt completely helpless. And I was not too much older than she was, so I was not a man of any kind of money. And I took out what little I had in my pocket, and it was maybe like $41. And I gave it to her, and I said, when that dish comes by, I said, you put $1 in the dish. But I said, you keep the rest of it for yourself, because I know you need it. And she pushed it back at me, and I pushed it back, and I said, you take it. I know you need this. And I want you to have it. Just take it. And I just sat there, and I was filled with so many emotions and anger. And this just anger filled me. And as I left the church, I did something that filled me with even more anger at myself. I walked out, and I kind of let the minister have it. I was livid. And so I walked out, and I told him, I said, I just have to wonder, do you know who's in your congregation? Do you have any idea? He said, what are you talking about? I said, I don't know if you spoke to God or not. I know you said you did, but I said, as far as I'm concerned, God doesn't give a rat's behind about $1,000 or 48 hours from anyone. I said, I know what you're trying to do to improve your church, but not everybody here has that. And I saw somebody break in there who believes because he said they're going to hell. He said, you're going to hell if you don't do what God demands. And she believes this. Well, his response to me, the congregation's moving out of the church. His response to me was immediate and, in retrospect, quite rehearsed. Because instantly, the Bible was in his hands. He held it up. Blasphemer, blasphemer, blasphemer. How dare you use God's name in vain? Who do you think you are? You are Satan. And instantly, of course, the congregation that's leaving, laser beams. They're looking at me like, ooh, who are you? How dare you interrupt our minister and affect our church this way? And I just walked away and I said, God knows what you've done here today. And I told him, I said, you're using the book as a weapon and a shield for something you want. That is never its intent. And I left. I have thought of that young lady from time to time. And every time I do, that's the reaction that comes out of me. I know that now, this is many years later, surely her children are grown. And I pray that their lives improve somehow. The problem for me is I'm always locked at that moment. I saw what happened to her then. And it's one of those memories that we all have different memories like that in life that we wish we could erase. And I couldn't. But I saw that as a terrible spiritual hypocrisy. And I said, and I may be completely out of limits on that, totally wrong. But that's how I took it when I watched her fall to pieces. I left the church for more than 20 years, organized religion. I had a terrible, terrible problem with it. I never lost my faith in my faith, but I lost my faith more in humanity than I did, God. And then, this is now years later, in 2009, Doug and I moved to Gaithersburg out of my home in D.C., and he said, there's something missing in my life. I need to go to church. I need to go back. And he had always been Methodist. And so next thing I knew, he started talking about Wesley Grove. I was not ready. There's no way. Nope, still, no. So he would come back, and then this was in February of 2009. In about maybe November, December of 2009, he came and he said, well, I've been talking to you about Orville Martin, the choir director there. I said, yes. And he said, well, Orville has decided he wants to step down, and I think I'd like to try it. How do you think? Do you think I can do that? And I said, I think you can do anything you set your mind to. And music has always been a passion, because, the piano is always playing in the house. And I said, I think you'd be stellar at it. Please share your gifts with the church. Well, are you ready to come to church? No, I'm not. And he never pushed that any further. He knew my position on that. So now we're in March of 2010, and he finally said, so now it's 4 months later, he's just thrilled, he's enjoying what he's doing with this choir and the church, and he said, you really need to come back to church. You need to come to Wesley Grove and see what we're doing and what's going on and all of this. And we're getting ready to do our first Easter cantata, and we want to put this program together and you to do it. So I had a moment of weakness, must have been something up there, pluck my little heart. I said, sure, if you say these people are this wonderful, then I absolutely have to go try. So it was one Wednesday evening in March of 2010. I remember I was standing right here, and the choir was busy assembling, and the first two people that walked up to me were Lois Kemp and Mary Jane Walter. And Mary Jane Walter was smiling, and Lois Kemp said, hi, so I understand you're our Jesus. Now, I had not wanted to come back to the church, so of course, no pressure. So here we are, I guess, 6 years later. I've been crucified 6 times, and I think it's time for someone else to take on that role. But it's been a blessing to have come here and do that because of this church. This church has been an incredibly welcoming thing, and I can assure you it's been life transformative for me. One of the things I disagree with in the Methodist Church proper is that the Methodist Church, states we are Christ-centered. But if you look very closely with the Methodist Church, we are Christ-centered except. And there are exceptions, and there have been exceptions in their history. This church, however, does not have that. And I like that about this church. This church says we accept everyone. And that's the way I see Christ-centered. I'm like, if Jesus Christ was standing right here, carnate, and he looked through those open doors, who would he let through those doors? Anybody? Everybody. Absolutely. Without question. He would let anyone through those doors. And we as the Methodist Church look at that and we say, yes, anyone who is curious about the church, anyone who's curious to get to know Christ, anyone who professes Christ as their Savior, come on in. We don't have exceptions. And so to me, this is how I look at that. This except, this one, E-X-C-E-P-T. That is hypocrisy. You cannot, to me, I do not understand how, Methodism or any church can say, we are Christ-centered, except. That word can't exist. How can you say Christ-centered and except in the same sentence? Paradox. Makes no sense. Christ is all welcoming. And that, to me, is how it should be. Therefore, this one is what it should be. And that, to me, this accept is what the church is all about. If we say we're Christ-centered, then that, to me, is how the conference should be, how every church should be, how anyone who is at least Christ-centered should be. We accept all through our doors. Everyone is welcome here. I had a discussion with my confirmand, David Wilson, a couple of weeks ago, that living as a Christian is often not easy. And, go back through your history. Sometimes I'm sure you've lived that. And it can sometimes be, he's trying to figure it all out, and I'm trying to help him, and I'm figuring it out with him. So, I'm far from perfect. But sometimes it can seem quite complicated. And I was like, good night. I'm so glad I'm, not necessarily a minister or a high bishop or whatever. Like, how do they remember all the things they're supposed to remember? And it can be quite complicated. When, to me, understanding how to be a Christian should be the simplest thing in the world. It should be very simple. I believe in simplistic Christianity. The root of the golden tree is, and this is what brings me to church whenever I come to church, we are really the root of the whole tree of all the other things that we do. We are here to do one thing. What is that? Why are we in this sanctuary? Anybody? To worship. To worship the Lord. That is why we're here. If you are here for any other reason, and you leave, and you forgot to humble thyself and worship the Lord, you are in the sanctuary, and you are in the church for the wrong reason. That should be happening every time you're in the sanctuary. Because that's really all that's demanded of us. And that, to me, is the root of Christianity. Jay read Romans 3. We all fall short. But there is atonement in Christ through God's grace for all of us, including those 8 deadly sins. There's an artist who shall go nameless who sang this song years ago, but I like the verse of it. The song is Man in the Mirror, and the lyrics go something like, and this could be for a woman as well, of course, anyone. And it says, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. And that really says a lot to me. When was the last time any of us have looked in a mirror for like 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes. Just kind of stared at the face that's looking back at you. Not putting on your makeup, not shaving your face, not doing your hair. Just look. You might want to take a look and do that. 5 minutes can be a long time when you're doing that. And the reason I say that is, what is that face staring back at you? Is it a face? I'm not talking about physical beauty. Is it a face of compassion? Is it a face? Because it's the face that everybody else sees. Let's face it. Let's face it, huh? The physicality of how we are, we never in our own lives actually see our own faces. We can only see the reflection. Everyone else sees this. We never do because our eyes are kind of stuck in there. But the reflection that we see, that everyone else does see, is that a face of Christianity? Is it a kind face? Is it a face that you would want to walk up to and say hi? Or share fellowship with? Everything is uncovered and laid bare to God, whether we admit that or not. We should be pleasing God. That's why we should be here. We should not be working to impress anyone around us. If others are impressed by our deeds or what we do, that's wonderful, that's great. But we should not be making that our focus to be here. I'm not here to impress anybody, and no one should be here to impress me. We should all be worshiping God, and then all the rest of it just sort of flows. I've heard sometimes Minister A or Minister B or Minister C in this, and yes, ministers are people too. Ministers make mistakes like we all do. But to say we're not going to come to worship because a particular minister is or is not here, to me makes no sense. I'm here to listen to what a minister has to say, but that's not my root. The root is, I'm here to worship. Regardless, we could have no minister for years. I will still come here to worship the Lord. and be in fellowship with my fellow Christians, whoever they are. We need to walk in the reality of God, not in the hypocritical pretense of it. Would you like examples of touching or sensing God's grace? When was the last time you planted a seed and watched that little plant come up and you just kind of touched its little couple of first leaves? When was the last time you held a kitten in your hand and you touched it and it rolled over on its back and it's just playing with its paws and lets you rub its belly because it feels safe in your guardianship? When was the last time you touched a baby that you created and held it and you touched it and it just fell asleep simply because it's safe in your care? If you've ever lost a child, or you've lost a loved one, or you've lost an animal that was a member of your family, cherish those good memories and bad memories. Because each of those examples, I believe, is just a minute facet of touching God's grace. It's one of the things we can appreciate in our lives. Jesus gave us, period, one commandment. And his sole commandment was that we love one another. Understand that when we worship, we have no green light to commit those 8 deadly sins. Rather, our worship should turn us away from the 8 deadly sins. The bottom line is, selfless fellowship in a church should never be usurped by selfish hypocrisy. Amen.